I think our board president is having some technical issues. Is that right? There you go.
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. We only have 34. Usually that number grows, but I say we go ahead and start. Provided that whoever we need is here, Dr. Kincannon.
Yes, we have a quorum and our presenters are here.
Okay. With my computer. So Dr. Kincannon, I'll let you just take it away.
Great. Would you like to call the meeting to order?
Yes, meeting called to order.
Okay.
Welcome everyone.
Great, thank you. All right, we welcome everyone back. I believe this is meeting number 7. We're excited about continuing our conversation regarding elementary schools this evening. But before we do that, we're going to have a special presentation by our demographer, Bob Templeton, and we're going to give him about 20 minutes. So we'll let him get started. Josh, I believe access to do that.
Yes, he does have the ability to share his screen if
Great. And then I would ask that you all hold your questions until he's finished, and then we'll have the opportunity to answer questions. So Mr. Bob Templeton.
Well, thank you. Good evening. It is my pleasure to be here with you this evening. And I will now start sharing my screen. So give me 1 second.
As needed, Bob, we're set up to do that as well for you.
Okay. Okay, can you see the screen okay? It looks like we're going with Jared's screen. So if you'll get down to the demographic portion. Okay, well, good evening. Good to be here with you this afternoon. My name is Bob Templeton with Templeton Demographics. We've been fortunate to work with Waco for the last couple of years. We work with about 80 school districts across the state of Texas. In this most unusual year, we are seeing some unusual trends related to the COVID-19's impact on the economy and the impact on enrollment. I'll start with the next slide. If you'll advance to the next slide. Just taking a quick look at the enrollment history for the last several years, you'll notice that this year's enrollment did decline by about 329 students, which was a drop of about 2.2%. The biggest share of that decline did happen at those elementary grade levels. It was the kindergarten, first, second, third, fourth, all of your elementary grade levels did see the biggest drop in the enrollment. We also had a pretty significant decline in 6th grade, but this was seen all across the state of Texas. This was not anything specific to the Waco school district. The high school grades actually held on pretty well, so we did not see a significant decline in the high school grades. That was also seen across the state. So it was primarily those elementary, middle school grades where we did see the biggest drop. Most of our clients experienced about a 4 to 5% drop in the enrollment. So Waco dropping about 2.2% was much better than what we saw in most of our Central Texas clients. Next slide. Just touching on the economic impacts that we've seen over the last year. Prior to the pandemic, the unemployment rate was at near 50-year lows. We were in that 3.6 to 4% range for the unemployment rate in the state of Texas and in the Waco MSA. And then when the pandemic started in March of 2020, the unemployment rate for the state shot up to about 13%. The Waco MSA's unemployment rate shot up to about 10.5%. And when we began to reopen over last summer, it dropped down to about 6%, and it has stayed at about 6% for the last several months. We do expect, as we get more of the vaccines rolled out, more of our population with the vaccines and more of the businesses reopening, especially in the leisure, hospitality, the restaurant industries. Once we get back to, we'll see a significant or continued decline in those unemployment rates. Next slide. Now, some of the economic highlights: Amazon Distribution Center is building in the Waco area. It's a $215 million complex with over 700,000 square feet. And the groundwork is starting and should open fall of 2021. We've got Hello Bello, which is a diaper distribution and manufacturing center, which is scheduled to open in Waco. It's about a 312,000 square foot facility, adding about 145 new positions, about a $31 million investment into the facility. Its grand opening is also anticipated this summer of 2021. Next slide. Now, I touched on this earlier, that we are seeing this trend all across the state of Texas. So here's a map of the Texas school districts. If you'll back up a slide. I'm sorry. Okay.
There's an automatic advance on the slide.
Yes. So something happened now. I apologize. I'm not seeing the screen any longer.
Jessica, can you go back one slide? And Bob, we're on the Texas slide.
Okay. So we are sharing my screen now. Okay. So the states, for the first time in our history, we saw a drop in the enrollment. It was negative 122,000 kids. First time in our history that we saw this drop. We believe that the enrollment should have been at about 5.5 million students had we not had the pandemic. So we are forecasting that October of 2021, the state is likely to see growth of about 200 to 240,000 kids. Now, when we look at the region, Region 12 and Region 13, you can see I've got a little blue dashed circle around Waco ISD. And during the 5-year period between 2015 and 2020, there was about a 3.5% decrease in enrollment. And during this past year, we actually saw 3.2%. So a majority of that decrease actually happened this past year. Region 12 as a whole did see a decline in enrollment of about negative 1.8%, which was a decline of about 3,312 students. So all across Region 12, the enrollment dropped pretty significantly. Region 13, just to the south, saw that drop as well, where it dropped about 3,000, excuse me, that drop was a drop of about 3%, which represents about 11,000 students. Okay. The district demographic snapshot, the overall population for the district has grown about 8.7%. It's grown from about 103,000 to about 113,000. The total population below the age of 19 has gone up about 6.1%. The median household income has gone up about 32%, and the number of households has gone up about 9.6%. Year-to-date home sales, this has been a little bit of a surprise. The housing market is seeing some incredible growth in the prices and in the values. And so year-to-date sales have actually gone up about 9.2%. The average price has gone up to 9.7%. Median price has gone up 12.2%. The number of listings is down 71%. The inventory, existing home inventory, is also down about 73%. This is related to the pandemic. So the pandemic has caused existing homeowners to be hesitant to list their homes for sale. It's the concern about having traffic through their homes during the pandemic, which has caused a shortage of supply of existing homes, which is helping to or contributing to the increase in the overall prices for housing. And we're seeing this also all across the state of Texas. Total number of home sales for within Waco ISD, you can see it's been averaging about 2,000 home sales per year, well above 2,000 over the last several years. Year to date through the first quarter is about 490 is the total home sales within Waco ISD for the first quarter. So we do expect that total home sales are going to be up above 2,000 again for 2021. Now, just kind of give you the big picture. So here's a map of your elementary attendance zones, and I've zoomed into, the majority of the elementary schools within Waco. We are tracking some multifamily and some single family, but you'll notice a majority of the Waco boundary is primarily built out. We do have some vacant land in the southern part of the district and in the eastern part of the district, and that yellow shaded area represents some future single family homes. The turquoise represents some future multifamily projects that we're tracking. The small purple shaded areas are some multifamily that's currently under construction. We've got about 335 multifamily units that are currently under construction. And some of those are college type, which would have a very low impact of students. We've got about another 1,125 multifamily units that are in various stages of development. Some of that is senior units, so they would have a zero impact. But we are tracking some pretty significant development out here in South Waco, which does represent about 350 to potentially 500 single family homes out in this location in the South Waco Elementary Attendance Zone. To get some of those details, the Lakes University Parks, it's 160 total lots. There's 57 occupied. We've got very few students in there right now. About 5 students is all we had in our geocode for the Lakes at University Park. There is, additional lots. There's some future phases there that represents about 91 that are in the final plat for phase 4. That price point starts at about 150,000. Likely it's going to be well over 200,000 due to the increase in cost of construction. The Lakes is a future development that represents about 285 acres of development. It is currently under review with the city, so it's still in the preliminary planning stages. Lennar is the builder that's looking to build in this development, but it represents about 350 future lots. So when that gets approved, or should it get approved, it would likely go fairly quickly because Lennar is a production type builder. Now looking at the transfer patterns, this is data from the Texas Education Agency. The top table represents the transfers into the district. And you can see over the last several years, back in 2015, we were transferring in 179 students. That jumped up to about 298 students during the last school year. This year, it dropped to about 257. That change likely had something to do with COVID-19 concerns, but overall, the 5-year period, we have seen an increase in the number of students transferring in over the last 5 years. The bottom portion of this table represents those students that live within the boundary of Waco ISD, but are transferring to either nearby public schools or to charter schools. You can see we've seen a pretty significant increase there as well, where back in 2015, we were transferring in about 2,149 students. It was 2,512 in 2019, and it dropped this year to about 2,476. You'll notice that Harmony Science Academy, that charter school, does represent the largest area that students are transferring to. The next one is the Rappaport Academy. That's also seeing about 645. And then we've got 216 that are transferring to the Waco charter schools. Now here's a look at the overall picture for charters. Charter schools are expanding at a very large degree across the state of Texas. During this past fall, we have 365,930 students that are attending charter schools in Texas. These stars do represent those charter school campuses. You'll notice they are concentrated in the major metropolitan areas: Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, San Antonio, Houston, but they literally are adding dozens of campuses each year. And so we do expect this surge in enrollment to continue. Now here's a look at the projections. So we are building in a little bit of a bounce back from the COVID pandemic for next year's enrollment, which would put next year's, this is October of 2021's enrollment, at 14,825. And then you'll notice the enrollment does decline. Now this is partially due to the drop in the birth rate that we're seeing within the Waco ISD boundary. And then in the latter part of the forecast, it starts to grow again. So we are building in some growth down the road as a result of some single family growth that's located in that South Waco area. At the campus level, start with the elementary campuses. You'll notice that this year's total elementary number is about 7,532. So within about 5 years, it gets to 7,713. So we're building in a little bit of a COVID return. There is some growth. You'll notice that South Waco Elementary Zone is growing to about 530 kids in 5 years. And then you've got Parkdale, which is one of your larger elementaries, at about 610 enrollment. And then Bells Hill Elementary stays in that 748 to 730 range over the next 5-year period. At the secondary campuses, the middle schools, they'll stay at about 2,800 for the next 1 to 2 years. And then that enrollment settles at about 2,712. Your largest middle schools are Cesar Chavez Middle School at almost 900 in 5 years. And then Tennyson Middle School will be at about 939 in 2023, and then it levels off just under 900 in 2025. Your high schools, University High School will stay in that just shy of 1,900 students for the foreseeable future, and Waco High stays in that 21 to 2,200 range for the next 5-year period. Key takeaways, then I'll be ready to answer some questions. Waco ISD enrollment is down about 330 students due to the COVID-19 pandemic concerns. The district's kindergarten class is expected to continue to decline due to the drop in the number of births within the Waco ISD. Waco ISD has more than 450 planned future lots under review in the South Waco Elementary Zone. That should help the district to grow a little bit in the latter part of this forecast. In 5 years, we're expecting the enrollment to be at about 14,630. And in 10 years, the enrollment could get to about 14,831. I apologize for those technical challenges on the presenting part on my end. Yeah, I'm not sure what was happening there, but let me know if you have any questions.
There were a couple of questions in the chat. One was about why Region 13's drop was a little bit larger than Region 12. Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's a great question. I believe it is partially tied to how those districts started the school year. Many of those school districts in Austin, specifically Austin ISD, and the majority of those districts started 100% virtually. We did see that districts that had a blended start had a little bit higher return. And so I believe that's also one of the factors. The other factor is they had a large number of charter schools that opened in Austin this year. So those two factors led to that big decline in Region 13.
Okay. And another question that you may or may not know, Chris had asked about what these numbers look like if you take out Guaca and Guama, and I think that's specific to students who are not part of Waco ISD, but attending Guaca and Guama.
Yeah, I'd have to look further into that to understand the context of that question, but I'd be happy to do that.
All right. Any other questions for Mr. Templeton? All right. And I think there was, Jessica, one more slide there that talked about the boundaries and attendance zones for Alta Vista, Waco, South Waco, and Kendrick.
So yes, I was asked to kind of zoom in to the South Waco area, and on this slide, those red outlines represent the current elementary attendance zones. So you can see the Alta Vista zone is,
it's kind of C-shaped.
yes, and so part of the zone does go across I-35, and then we've got the dots are color coded to their attending campus. So the yellow dots are students that are attending Alta Vista. The red dots are attending Kendrick. The green dots are attending Bells Hill. The blue dots are attending South Waco. And so then I was asked to kind of provide a little bit of a breakdown of those Alta Vista elementary students. So there are 201 students that live east of I-35. That would be east of I-35, this particular area. There's about 205 students that live west of I-35. And there's about 40 students. You can see some of the yellow dots scattered throughout the other zones. So about 40 students that are coming from the other elementary zones within Waco ISD. And there are 17 students that are coming from outside the district, for a total of about 463 students that are attending Alta Vista Elementary School.
Great. It definitely gives us some insight where students are coming from and where they're attending, and feeds definitely right into our next question. And we'll pause just one more time, see if there are any final questions for Mr. Templeton. Otherwise, we'll shoot over.
Yeah, a quick question just about the new manufacturing and distribution centers, the Amazon and the Hello Bello and other things like that. Then the jobs that will be created and people that we hire, do we expect that to be a sort of a shuffling of the deck of employees who are already in Waco leaving their current jobs to take those jobs? Do we expect people moving into Waco? What kind of trends do we expect to see? And second, birth rate decline, is that happening nationally? Is that something we expect to maybe rebound after COVID?
You know, it is happening nationally, so it's not just a Waco phenomenon. You know, we do see that when families are distressed financially, that can cause a pause on the decisions of having children. So we are hopeful that we will see the birth rate pick back up again. Also, the millennials are historically the millennials have waited to marry, waited to make some of those big life decisions. And so many of them had delayed that decisions to have kids. Well, now they're getting into those years where it'll start to pick up as well. So we're hopeful that the millennials getting into their 30s, and that sounds kind of strange that that's when the millennials are starting to have their kids. And the fact that we're coming out of the pandemic should create some optimism around the finances, which should help the birth rate as well. Now, to your Amazon question, yes, there will be people moving into the region from outside the region due to the Amazon and the Hello Bello expansion. So I've got my daughter is actually moving to Gatesville. He is going to be working at the hospital, and they were visiting with some new folks in their area that were going to work at the Amazon distribution center, and they were coming from out of state, and they were exploring housing in the general region. So I think we will see families moving into the region for those jobs. Well, I'm going to stick around for a bit, so but I'll be ready to answer any additional questions, or if I need to look up anything that I can on my end, I can certainly be ready to help with that as well.
Great, I appreciate it, Bob. All right, Jessica, if you want to pull up the presentation, we'll kind of really build on that last slide focused around the geographic location, but it takes us right into the elementary school strategies here as we move forward. And so last time, as we look at the challenge around elementary schools, we focused on the various needs, much like we did on the other campuses, from the $200 million identified for the facility condition assessment, all the way down to the impact on operational needs in terms of abilities for teaching staff and those kind of things. And ultimately, as we looked at the elementary schools, along with all the other grade levels, we really wanted to identify, you know, if we were asked the question, what is the highest and best use of funds? How would we want to move forward? And so that really takes us back to, you know, really focused on Alta Vista, Kendrick, and South Waco. And I come back to this slide of just number one, that from a geographic location, these are three campuses that are in proximity to each other, but that really pairs then with point number two about the need to address the facility condition assessment and the educational suitability needs across the campuses. And then finally, three, just like you heard Bob identify, is, you know, we think about growth and we think about number of students enrolled in the campuses, and ultimately, how do these pair well together? And ultimately, you know, as we talk about that highest and best use of funds moving forward, this really sticks out as a priority here as we move forward. To dive a little bit deeper into that, we wanted to dive into the campuses, much like a facility tour, and we were able to see one of these here, which was actually Kendrick along the way. And starting at a broad level, we of course look at the site. Here's Kendrick Elementary School, a little over 10 acres. This campus was originally built, if you go on to the next slide, was built in 1952. And as you can tell from the architecture, the building was actually exterior corridors. They've come back later and actually closed in the corridors to create an internal circulation campus. Roughly, it can support 500 students. And ultimately has a large FCA need just to maintain the building here at the bare minimum level. We always look as well as core and cafeteria, the cafeteria space and the library space, and then as well as classrooms, making sure that they're appropriately sized and can support the school. As we look at the next campus, as we look at South Waco, here, this is much closer to a typical elementary school site in terms of size. We usually talk about 15 to 20 acres of space. So here we see Kendrick not only supports the campus that you see on the left, which is actually the north side, and public baseball fields or community baseball fields the district is partnered with there on the right side. As we look inside of this facility, and we talk about the age, we're able to confirm that this was originally built in '89. It does support 820 students, a little bit lower from the FCA need, but there are some challenges in terms of the cafeteria and the library and how we move forward. So I did not mention right now what would be proposed on Kendrick is to rebuild that facility to a modernized facility. Here at South Waco, we would look at augmenting and renovating portions of the building or a good portion of the building to implement best practices for learning environments today. So we might get rid of that lime green unless we really love it here moving forward. And then finally, Alta Vista Elementary School, and this is one of the greatest challenges in terms of the site size, being just a touch over 5 acres. That again, we usually look at a minimum of 15 up to 20 for an elementary school site. And then as we look inside the building, this has some of the oldest facilities within the district, starting in 1910, then with additions later in '89. Capacity is roughly 500 students. FCA of 10.2 million, but ultimately the challenge to be able to bring this up to a modern facility is pretty great in terms of site size and the existing materials there. And so at this one, we would looked at shifting, work with Bob and his team over time to bring it in, take these students and put them into Southwest and Kendrick zones there. So as we look at those campuses, this ultimately brings us back into focus of the facility master plan. And we present the goals again for the elementary school long-term vision about addressing the schools with the highest need, being able to provide additional education support staff and operational efficiencies, and ultimately align the campuses and capacities with the projections over the 10-year need and multiple bond program. We looked at those two groups of facilities. And so Jessica, if you'll give us one more click here, ultimately that leads us towards that focus on the facility master plan, which we would identify as that immediate priority is addressing Kendrick, South Waco, and Alta Vista. But that long-term is over time, the district, the board, the community would continue an implementation of the long-term vision goals across that entire portfolio of Waco ISD elementary school campuses, that this is really providing that roadmap to be able to guide decisions today as well as in the future. So I will take a pause there, or actually we're going to shift over to an activity unless there are any questions, but want to ask everybody as we've come back to this idea, as we've presented the information, is ultimately you've had an opportunity to think about it. We wanted to make sure that this elementary school long-term the vision goals, along with the immediate and long-term priorities identified, are that highest and best approach to meeting the needs of the Waco ISD community. So we would love for everybody to take out their phone and be able to vote, and it is activated. So if you remember, you can text to the phone number 22333. Text would be OCR 1950, and then you would respond 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from strongly agree to strongly disagree, or you can do it online. We'll give everybody here just a couple more minutes. Had about 20 responses so far. almost here to 30 responses, and looks like many of y'all strongly agree, with a few in the middle or slightly disagreeing.
Jared, I saw a question in the chat room. I think it would help me too. Defining more succinctly what it is we have narrowed down to. Highest and best approaches. It seems it's a little bit abstract or vague for me. I mean, I think I want to agree, but I'm not entirely sure what you might think I'm agreeing to.
I think ultimately what we're looking at saying is that we want to align with the facility long-term vision goals. So ultimately that we do want the highest and best use, that we're looking at opportunities to provide the best educational staff and operational efficiencies, and then as well align with demographic projections. And so yes, those are kind of high-level statements and goals that is part of the focus of the facility master plan. But based on the data that was presented, and we went into it a little bit deeper last time, but that first slide kind of had 5 slides from the facility condition assessment, educational suitability, and ultimately, when we look at that data, that was the slide with the 3 numbers on it, that Kendrick, South Waco, and Alta Vista are the ones with the highest need. So we're saying that that's the priority number 1, and then priority as we move forward, we'll come back to the goals and address things across the facility master plan.
Okay. So, yeah, I guess we struggled pretty mightily with how to draw the attendance zones for those 3 schools 9 years ago. And I still, we came up with an answer. I don't think anybody was particularly happy with the answer. I also don't see a clear path from here forward on how to address those same issues that are in existence now. Maybe you've got some ideas, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here.
So I think Carrie, you definitely hit on one of the key topics that will come up as we move forward. I think the way that we're approaching it is really first address what does the facility need and kind of balance between those two. But ultimately there would be a boundary process that would have to occur later as that is moving forward.
It's hard to keep Interstate 35 out of it, as I remember. But it's also interesting. South Waco is where our potential seems to be where our potential for growth is.
Correct. And if you look at the Bob's information, roughly the Alta Vista students were split half and half between I-35. So there are some natural boundaries there that could apply.
And Carrie, did you have another question, or can I jump in here?
Well, I guess the only other thing that I would add to that, okay, is it possible to build an elementary school on the west side of 35 large enough to accommodate all the students that live west of 35? Can you make a Kendrick that big?
So what we've been talking about or been looking at is about a 750 student elementary school. It's generally the number that we've been talking about.
Okay.
It's right now, Kendrick's at roughly 550, 200 are on the west side. So there would be your 750. And part of that balance that we will have to look at is, we don't want to build at capacity. So that number may bump to 800.
Yeah, I'd be tempted to suggest building it bigger, but okay, that's getting specific. Aaron, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. So I really echo kind of your question about that this is a little bit vague, but Jared, if I'm understanding, this is a question about what do we, the 66 people on this call, hopefully we'll all vote on this. What do we value? Do we value looking at demographic trends, making plans over the next 5 to 10 years, and adopting some sort of plan so that our facilities meet the highest and best use for education. Do we agree with that, or are there things that we would be willing to compromise and say, we don't want the highest and best, most efficient thing because we like to preserve neighborhood schools or something like that? Because I mean, the conversation last time got into a lot of specifics about consolidation and taking places that are existing schools and turning them into other facilities that they would no longer be elementary schools. And so it sort of feels like, you know, are we asked to vote on, do we like that plan that we saw last time? Or are we kind of taking a step back and saying, after looking at the demographics and long-term trends and the facilities that are in dire need, I mean, things that are crumbling and are not happy places for teachers or students. And so based on that, do we want to adopt a plan that aligns with the highest and best use for our students and teachers? Or do we say, in spite of demographic trends and crumbling structures, we'd like to keep the status quo? Like, and I'm putting it in rather stark terms. I'm just trying to, like, who wouldn't want the highest and best use? So why wouldn't all be agree? But some people are saying, no, I don't agree. So I'm just trying to get clear on what you're asking us.
Sure. So I would say that we're asking for that. What is the highest and best use? So does the proposed strategy, in particular with Alta, Vista, Kendrick, South Waco, align with that initial first step to a future? And I think part of the challenge becomes when we talk about elementary schools, there's 15, 16 campuses. You know, we've identified some big rocks, I'll say, with the middle schools, with the high schools as well. And ultimately, how do you weigh all these out? And you know, the committee has identified, man, I would love to have all these things and, you know, starting to put rain. So what we're trying to do is set a framework around that. And we've kind of done the same thing for the high school and the middle school zones, as well as we really focused in on Waco High School, that we heard clearly from the community that was the highest need. At the middle school, that's where, there's 3 out of 4 become the highest need there. And at the elementary school, again, we picked 3 here that are continuing forward as that highest need within the district. And so then what is that best opportunity? The conversation hasn't changed really from last time. We've tried to provide additional data at this point.
Yeah.
I would
and I'm just curious that if there's anybody on the, so I agree with the statement, and I voted that way. And I'd just be curious to hear if people disagree, why would you disagree with the highest and best use of our facilities for the teachers and the students in Waco ISD in light of the demographic trends? Or what am I missing? Because I found it to be persuasive. And what am I missing among our other of the 66 people on this call, some of whom I can't see, but what are you opposed to or questioning or don't understand?
So I think what I'm reading into the comments in the chat box is maybe we jumped in there fast this evening and people were unclear about the plan that they were voting for, or the language in the question in the way that it was framed. But I think we're on track now. I think Jared has explained that. But if there is a reason that you would disagree with that, we feel we'd welcome your comments.
So this is Dr. Henry. So I did not answer the poll because I'm unclear what I was being asked. So I posed something of a question, and I'm wondering if this is the case. So is the question this: we agree that we want to focus on the schools that have the greatest need first, and then come back to the schools that are in less need at this point? Is that the question?
That's correct.
Okay, that was not at all clear in the question posed to us.
Yeah.
So if what we just said is what I just said, now I think that I can make a better decision.
Thank you. That we talked at our last meeting about prioritizing, and perhaps we should have done a little better job reteaching that this evening. And I apologize for my voice cracking. I'll let Jared have it back.
So I think one, if you are interested, you can change your vote with those clarifications if you type in undo in your text. And then we can, make sure that we're on the right page. And if you haven't voted, we would love for you to vote.
I guess.
Okay. And so I think, part of this is, us, we're trying to identify, and elementary schools are a bigger challenge here as we move forward, but we're also trying to come back to our larger discussion here of the direction of the facilities master plan. And so Jessica, if you will, go to the next one. And I think that you'll start seeing kind of how this is coming together in terms of, we have delved very deep into the specifics of campuses, and we're trying to back out to like that 50,000 square foot level. And so, or 50,000 foot level. And so really, as we look in the past, and we really look at all the things that we've covered, from the facility condition assessment, the demographics, we've gotten into the the educational suitability needs, and really work together to contrast those, understand them, and present them. And yes, Jessica, you can go to the end here. Ultimately this is really founded in the highest hopes from this group here of what we started out. And you see that in the Wordle here in the center of really focused on keeping Waco a great place to be here in the heart of Texas, and really focused on, using the hot term for the night, the highest and best use of funds, students, for our teachers, and to be able to move forward in the design. And so as we look, as we've gone, deeper into each level and we back out, what we've started to do is try and identify a framework to help guide the master plan of what are the decisions. And as we make decisions, what are those key elements that we want to move forward? And so that first guiding principle we wanted to identify, again, think high level, 50,000 foot level, is really creating facilities throughout Waco ISD in support of the district's vision for academic excellence. So we're trying to really create facilities that support education, that support teacher retention, really create 21st century learning environments that create a great place to be. Goal number 2 is about ensuring equity across primary and secondary campuses for academic and co-curricular programs. So as we talk about, exactly like Kendrick, Alta Vista, South Waco, we not only want to look at those 3 campuses, but we want to look across the district. We heard from several individuals, not only about look at the campus level, but how are we supporting special education? How are we supporting technology within the district, and making sure that we're creating an equal opportunity for everybody throughout the district. And the third one is maintaining and protecting the community's investment in facilities while improving operational efficiency. So ultimately, the district has invested a lot of monies to the facilities and has been working to maintain them over time, and we want to continue that process. And so we've been challenged on some of the solutions that we've been presented, and we've challenged the district back and forth to be able to find that best operational operational efficiency while maintaining those investments. And so what does this look like as we think about those guiding principles into actual projects? And so this is, again, where we balance between those immediate priorities, those long-term priorities, as we think about a facilities master plan that goes across a 10 or 15-year period. As we start off, what we have heard from this committee is some of those immediate priorities become Waco High School, addressing the middle schools at Carver, Indian Springs, and Tennyson, addressing the elementary schools at South Waco, Kendrick, and Alta Vista, but also looking at some district-wide goals, capital improvement projects aligned with the facility condition assessment, that ultimately, as we take those 3 guiding principles and we start to implement it, that we can look at an immediate priority, And then from a long-term priority is really the continued development of those best opportunities for the students from pre-K through higher education, includes programs like CTE, those things. And then as well, the goal kind of at the elementary school level, but there will be continued needs identified across that 10 or 15-year period that are really going to create new inflections as the master plan continues to live out here moving forward in the future. And so these two slides are really important. We can flip between the two of them as needed, but ultimately what we're looking at is to many of the comments tonight of what are the guiding principles, making sure that this is setting correctly of 1, 2, and 3 to be able to create that foundation. And then what are the projects, including the immediate priorities. So I'll pause there and see if there are any questions, because the next step is we are planning to move into a breakout group. And we want to talk about these to make sure that they align and what are the great things. If they align, what are the challenges? Because ultimately this will help us move forward to wrapping up the facility master plan process.
Just one thing I would say is I think with the demographic presentation, which was fascinating, and I'm really grateful that we had that. I didn't feel like there was enough of a so what conversation. Like we got a lot of data, and I think the so what was implied, and this is not to fault the demographer who did an incredible job or anybody who put together this presentation, but I'm sort of thinking like, so what's the big story here? And it seems like the big story is that things are incredibly competitive in the market for education in the Waco McLennan MSA, that there are more and more charter schools, there are more private schools, there are niche boutique private schools popping up. There's, there were some charter schools in there that I haven't even heard of. And we have ISDs around us with better facilities and things and that are growing and improving. And our campus is, a school that was built in 1910 that had some improvements in the 90s, a school that was built in 89 and just got flooded. And I think to me, there were two big takeaways from the demographer's presentation. One, that we're not seeing huge growth in Waco ISD. If anything, we're seeing sort of a dip, a plateau, maybe some moderate increases over the next 10 years, but we're not seeing explosive growth. The other thing I saw just is again, this thing about the competitive landscape for students. And if we don't have facilities that are attractive, both for teachers and for students, and that do all the things, the priorities here, that academic excellence, equity, there's conversations about mental health for teachers and students now, especially, pre-COVID, it was a big deal. Now it's an even bigger deal. And to say that you're coming to a classroom with like lime green walls and teachers have to use bathrooms that sort of degrade their humanity, that the library is not a well-lit space, or you have classrooms with no natural light. I think if you want to talk about mental health, you want to talk about attracting students, you want to talk about equity, having a campus that does that is so important. So for me, that was the big takeaway. That was the so what of all the demographics. This seems just really urgent.
Thank you for that, Aaron. I think the statewide numbers reflect that increase in competition, education, and I think the quality of our facilities makes such a huge difference for not only the students and the educational environment, but also for our teachers. And teachers do want to work in a nice facility, in a place that they're comfortable, and it does enhance and kind of raise the level of education for everyone. So I appreciate your comments.
And I think very much as you look at, even that goal number 1, that is talking about student pride and attraction, competing in the marketplace, all the way to the educational facilities we support. So if everybody feels comfortable with the intent of these goals and where they're headed, as well as the master plan, if you'll go 2 slides, yep, we're going to switch over to breakout groups. So we're going to switch over to 4 groups as we have done before. We're going to have 20 minutes to discuss. And what we're asking for is ultimately, how well do these guiding principles align with your expectations and support for the long-term vision of the district? Basically, if we follow these goals, if we follow these priorities that are identified, does that create the Waco ISD of your future that you're visualizing? And so we'll moderate within this process, have discussion here for about 20 minutes, come back, report out to the group, and we will again ask everybody to vote to show how well they support. Again, the 1 being 1, highly support, and then 5 being you don't support these goals and priorities that we've identified based on the information today.
So Jared, to clarify, are we soliciting potential projects or just focusing on the goals?
How well do the goals align with priorities?
All right, I'll go ahead and assign groups. Will go automatically in. And for those of you that will be in room 3, that will be facilitated by Mr. DeBeer. Says it won't let me move you to room 1.
Hey, Joshua, this is Bob Templeton. I'm dropping out of the meeting. Just thought I'd let someone know that I am leaving the meeting.
Okay, thank you for letting us know.
Hey, and man, I don't know what was going on my end. I was having some craziness with, I thought the PowerPoint started with the O'Connell PowerPoint. Did it start with O'Connell?
How I had it was,
Well, it was just crazy on my end, and I'm sure it was all my fault, but I thought I was seeing the O'Connell PowerPoint as I started, and then my Zoom kept changing, and the main screen would drop off, and then I would have to select it at the bottom. I mean, it was, and I use Zoom quite a bit. I don't know what was going on my end to cause so much of a challenge.
yeah.
I tried to stay as calm as I could, but yeah. And then I think there was a automatic advance on some of the slides that I'm not sure how that got turned on.
Yeah, I'm not
But
sure.
okay.
All righty.
All right. Well, we'll talk to you later.
All right, take care. Bye.
Small classroom that was divided by filing cabinets and flexible enough for modern pedagogies. We talked about today. Yes, and so essentially the long-term goal over many bonds would be to fix many or all of the elementary schools. Right. But the most immediate priority would be the Alta Vista, South Waco, and Kendrick configured replacements.
And those are, I'm sorry, those were the schools that were lowest ranked on our educational suitability and facilities condition assessment. So you'll remember those graphs that the architects showed and where they drew that line on those lower ranked elementary schools. Those were in that cluster in South Waco. So that's what those were.
I didn't come away, and maybe other people did, and this will be the last thing that I'll say. I only came away from the last meeting with the understanding that these were the 3 schools that were in most need, but I came away thinking that there was a great deal of indecision about what to do with the 3 schools. And so I just need to know, did I miss that, or have we not made a decision about those 3? I mean, I think people were talking about Alta Vista. They were concerned about it and what it would mean to replace it or do whatever it wants to. But so have we made any decisions about that? I just trying to clarify for myself.
Yeah, I think that's what we're trying to get to tonight.
Perfect. Okay. I understand now. Thank you very much.
You are welcome. Good question, Patience. Thank you for that. I have a question on the slide about immediate priorities. And there's a bullet that says district-wide goals. Can somebody clarify what those are when it comes to facilities beyond the, we've already talked about the priority, the guiding principles, things like that. What are the district-wide goals?
And so those were introduced very early on in the process, and we've been sort of working behind the scenes to sort of clarify that. That came up, one good example is technology goals across the district. So for example, Jerry Allen had worked with principals and educators about what the goals were. So they've got an implementation plan for this technology. So those are things that touch all campuses over time, and it's not as simple as this campus gets this. So.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to add, just from my experience, having done facilities work for a long time, it takes years to do this kind of work. Probably never ends, to be honest. And so when you start talking about the number of elementary schools that we have, you have to decide where to start to do the work, and then you have to keep revisiting it. So if we were to have this bond election this fall, and then and take on these projects, and then we would come back as these projects are finishing and think about the next round of projects. So you would likely see another bond election year in a few years to keep the work going, and maybe even sooner for your elementary schools. My experience in Belton was that we were tackling elementary schools every 2 years. Now, mind you, we were growing, and middle schools every few years, and then high schools obviously are longer. But this is a process.
Directly from a neighborhood, closing the school down, and then you try to combine two other schools into one, and like the family.
Extracurricular at all levels, honestly. The strength of our arts programs, the strength of our sports programs, and the continuity between them, elementary to to that elementary level for a while. But the kids that are in elementary now are going to be moving into the middle school level. And rather than see them moving out of the district for other opportunities, other choices, maybe there needs to be a blend between looking at the a prioritization of elementary and middle school in order to help retain some of those kids as they're moving forward.
That's the rest of the group thinking about prioritizing elementary and middle school towards retaining students.
Opportunities our students had, we would have never had if we would have stayed at AJ. It's just the opportunities whenever you combine campuses, you're welcome to come to Kendrick. I'm the principal here at any time, and you can see our facilities and the opportunities our kids have. And then you'll walk to Bells Hill and you will be amazed at the opportunities kids have there. I'm all for Bells Hill is a wonderful, high-performing campus. I live in the neighborhood. My kids all attended that school. But it's just the resources you have when you're able to combine schools. And it is scary. I was part of the A.J. Moore University High School consolidation. But the resources our kids, even my personal children at that time, it was just, it was amazing.
Jerry, you welcome.
And I just wanted to kind of piggyback off of what Keith said. I don't know if y'all can hear me. I apologize. I just wanted to piggyback off of what Keith said because my kids did go down to Vista. I still have a daughter there. I went there. But I just feel like you said, it is scary, consolidating and everything. But to me, I know that they were saying that there's like 450 lots that are pending to be built.
Detail of Waco High School. A lot of discussion took place there. So to the extent that you, I guess, feel that that was a good direction initially, my feeling it does, as far as the high school goes, and Waco High specifically, I think it matches up, very well to the priorities that we've discussed and talked about that Kyle just reiterated, the guiding principle.
This is Johnette. I'm having computer problems, but I guess you can hear me. I don't see it so much as an either or, but I do think the high school age students are probably more cognizant of facilities than even the younger ones. So I mean, I really hate to think of it as an either or, but I think the high school priority is critical because they're becoming adults. They're more aware of what they have and those kind of things.
I have two high schoolers and a middle schooler, and I have to say the conversation about are we going to keep our kids in Waco ISD? We have a junior and a freshman. But are we going to keep them here for our youngest? That's on the table because I don't know, the high school is a constant challenge for us, and it's really tiring. And the facilities are a problem. There is water in light fixtures when it rains. There's a mildew smell, and I've got a kid that is very allergic to mold. And I mean, we're looking at our daughter wants to apply to Ivy League. Well, we're a little bit concerned about the profile of the high school. We have to submit a profile. And I don't know, it's really important. And where a kid graduates from is really important. And if we're looking at if we're trying to be forward thinking here in Waco ISD, I think we really do have to focus on the high school. Because the tone of the high school sets the tone for the whole district. I think we covered that early on, or talked about that early on, but we're in the first on program.
Susan, would you refresh my memory? There's I guess recent legislation that the voters are somehow allowed to basically a line item veto where they can pull, I guess, is that just for non-educational facilities or how many different things or types of project? I mean, can they
Right.
All right, Josh, are we all back together?
We all are.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Well, we had some great discussions, and I figure we'll report out here before we go to take the vote and kind of see the support. So I was in group number 1, and overall everyone agreed that the 3 goals aligned with the priority needs. There was some discussion about, were those goals in rank order, I'll say, and know that they are not intended to be in rank order. There was a discussion about whether or not number 2, where it was about equity, really what should be goal number 1 within that framework. But ultimately, we know that the 3 really work together, so equity can't happen without the facilities and focus across all campuses. Then as we talked about the priorities between the immediate and the long-term priorities, ultimately there was still some expressed concern about the closure around Alta Vista and just what that means for the campus, but we also talked about the demographics and where students are actually at. And there was an individual who also shared their experience with the closure of A.J. Moore and University High School from the previous bond, about the opportunity as you look at those facilities that it really creates for the students and the teachers that they wouldn't have had if they had remained as 2 separate campuses. So overall, our group number 1 was supportive of it. The last question that kind of came up at the end, and ultimately this will lead to the next meeting as well, is ultimately, can we afford it? And so we talked about how right now we're trying to identify the goals and identify those immediate priorities so we can start identifying, in essence, projects and cost. And then ultimately next meeting, we'll be looking at the financial capacity of the district. So that'll help us weigh those 2 elements together. So that was kind of where we ended the conversation for group number 1. So group number 2, I just see Kyle on the screen, so I'm going to pick him and imagine that he's group number 2.
I think we were group number 3, but we're happy to go second tonight. Thanks, Jared. I think that there was a lot of consensus that the guiding principles point us in the right direction. But what I think Marlon Jones really effectively reminded us of is that it's not going to be facilities alone. And there was a lot of discussion about how the experience that our students have and the things that create student success are really multifaceted. And facilities play into that, but are not in and of themselves the only tool that we have in the toolbox or the only answer to our questions. We did talk in terms of priorities about kind of a push and pull of the significance of the high school and the significance of elementary and middle school facilities. I think it was really sort of clearly stated by some folks the way the high school serves as a capstone on students' experiences and is something that students look to and families look to, and that it casts a perception to some extent of the district as a whole. While at the same time, we have this pattern where, especially later elementary years into middle school years, we start to lose students and then may gain some of them back in high school. So it's really significant to think about those elementary and middle school facilities in terms of how we use those to help retain students and keep them in the district, along with all those other pieces that go into student success. So certainly, I think, Jared, our group ended in kind of a similar place, looking at the significance of all of the immediate priorities, and questioning how to balance them against what the district might be able to afford.
Thank you, Kyle. So then we'll switch over to group 3 or group 2 that's acting as group 3, maybe with Casey.
Nope.
Wrong again. We were group 4, but we'll
Okay.
go number 3. I'm sorry, Jess, you're probably number 2, but I'll go next. And so our group started off very similarly, it sounds, to the other groups, is we felt as a group very clear, much clearer about the goals and priorities, and thought general agreement, those sound good. We are less clear about the immediate projects. So we talked a little, to remind us, jog our memories, we talked a little bit about sort of those key elements. And so there's still a little lack of clarity or unsurety about the elementary schools. We talked a little bit about clarifying that. And then we segued over to sort of what's happening next, as we talked about how do we prioritize these projects? What's the order of these projects? And so we talked about that needing a convincing rationale to the district, because everyone's going to want their campus first, and how is that decided? And we indicated that that's next steps as we get into bond planning, and we'll be hearing more about that bonding capacity and next steps in the next meeting. And then we also talked briefly about, I thought it was well said, noted the Achilles heels is the declining demographic. Essentially we're going out and asking for new schools at the same time we've got declining numbers, not in a huge way, but we think that's going to be a little challenging to communicate with the public. And so it was suggested that we, promote and talk about, we focus on the facts, the guiding principles, sort of the rationale, how we broke down, how we got to where we are. And so communicating those as clearly as possible, we think would help. So that's kind of where we tied off. And so I think next it would go over to Jessica's group.
That's right.
Yes. Well, really, our group really echoes a lot of the things that we've discussed already and that you've heard. But so I'll just kind of focus on really what the challenges were. And although there's a lot of positives that come from upgrading these facilities, doing some replacements as well, the challenge is going to be the emotional or the attachment that these communities have to some of these schools, and really how we communicate that to these communities, specifically the schools that we discussed being Alta Vista and Carver, and just their historical facts that they play within those communities. But again, everyone in our group kind of said the same things of, we understand the need for these improvements. We don't disagree, but we need to make sure that it's communicated and tell that whole story as to why we're looking at closing some of these schools. I will say, as far, one of the things I heard about the demographic report is, although there is a prediction of some decline in that, our group discussed how we feel that we're doing good and well with our discussion of working with what we have, consolidating and really just kind of working on that part. So really the only negative feeling that anybody talked about and where we ended was just those attachments to some of those facilities, and just addressing that to the community.
Great. Thank you all for sharing. And so I think as we come together, and I think this is ultimately what we're focused on. And Jessica, if you want to bring up the presentation again, we do want to make sure it's clear. Hopefully the question's clear this time, but ultimately we do want everybody to poll here on how well these guiding principles and priorities align with your expectations of support for the long-term vision of the district. Is ultimately over the next 10 or 15 year period that following these 3 items, the goals and priorities outlined, is going to end in that result. So we'll give everybody here a minute or so to be able to vote. So we're about halfway there. About 30 people have responded. Looks like we just have a couple more responses here.
Who writes these questions?
A couple of people here at the firm. Are you looking for a job, Carrie?
I'm kind of struggling with some grammar or something, I think, maybe. Just, it's okay. I have a job. Thank you, Jared. It's not a good job, but I have a job.
Well, unfortunately, a lot of times we're architects and not English majors.
I understand.
There's a great Mark Twain quote that is only the uncreative mind can think of one way to spell a word. I like to misspell it multiple times in the same sentence.
Is there some kind of sentence structure problem there, or am I just maybe not reading it right? Maybe we're missing punctuation that would help.
Some punctuation may help there to make it more clear.
Might clarify. Okay.
But we do appreciate everybody's
Expectations of support. Yeah. Okay.
Do appreciate everybody focusing in here and being able to help voice their support of the goals and priorities. And I think this really leads to next time, and we kind of hinted at that already. Jessica, if you want to advance here. So we have run through meeting number 7. And so next time we hit on it is bonding capacity. We're going to talk a little bit more about maybe some prioritization of the projects or some prioritization exercises, as well as trying to wrap up the facility master plan focus about where is it that we want to be in the next 10 to 15 years moving forward on the district. And so I believe that is it for tonight. So unless anybody had any questions or feedback, we would call it an end for the day.
Yes. Are there any questions? All right, meeting adjourned. I think our board president's having some technical difficulties. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Right now, but yes. Yes, Stephanie, you have a question? Or are you saying bye? Bye.
I'm sorry, I'm saying goodbye. I've got children in the background, all sorts of things. Bye, everyone.
Good night.
Bye. Thank you.
I want to call attention to Susie March's comment. I think that's a really important point that we need to discuss at some point.
We can look at transfers into.
Yeah, we can't do it now because we've adjourned, but at some point I'd love to know